Welcome. My name is Jamie Steve, and I work with the Tamarack Institute. You are here for the webinar titled Reimagining Systems, the Role of System Orchestrators. We're really excited for today's session. We're going to get started in a moment, but first I'm going to hand the mic over to my colleague Danya for some introductory announcements.
Jamie, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you so much for being here. I think we're here from literally all over the world. So for those of you for whom it's early morning, thanks for getting up early. For those of you who are late in your day, thanks so much for staying up late with us. It was about 2 years ago that I first met my good friends at Mantra for Change, which is an organization and network based out of India doing amazing work with young people around education and youth futures. And I got to asking them some of what was inputting into the work that they were doing. And they introduced me to Center for Exponential Change. And it's just been such a pleasure to get to know the amazing women at Center for Exponential Change and how they think about systems orchestration and how they think about their role and the role of leaders who are systems orchestrators. So we're in for a real treat today, and I hope you will find some sources of inspiration for your own journeys to prompt exponential change and share with us throughout this conversation your own examples of how you are sparking exponential change. I will note that I am speaking in English today. Thank you, everyone, for accommodating me in my language, my first language. Merci de participer à cette conversation, for all of you who speak French. I will also note that I'm joining today from the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. And I was speaking over the weekend with an elder from Pikwakanagan First Nation, which is just about 20 kilometers from where I live and raise my family. And we got to talking about the idea of dignity, dignity for all living things, dignity for the lands and the waters that surround us. And I think it's such an apt conversation to have had the opportunity to be in. Prior to this conversation, we're going to hear a lot from Priya and the others at Center for Exponential Change about dignity in this conversation. I also want to acknowledge all of those of African descent who have came here either as settlers or as migrants in this generation or generations past, including those of us who have come here involuntarily and those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Thank you for the contributions that you have made and tribute to you and your ancestors of African origin and descent. With that, I'm very pleased to turn to my good friends and Andrea Neptune, who's with, as many of you will know, Social Innovation Canada, which is a really important organization and network in the space of systems orchestration, to kind of tell us why we're here and the origin of this conversation.
Thank you, Danya, and thank you to the whole team at Tamarack for pulling this together. I too heard about the Systems for this organization and this initiative a couple of years ago at the Skoll World Forum, and was so inspired, even just the term exponential change, the promise of exponential change, and wanted to know more, wanted to understand more, wanted to understand this role of systems orchestration. And how do we work together in collaboration to try and achieve the outcomes that we want for our country and our society? I'm calling in today, I just want to say, from Toronto, the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, along with many other nations and peoples. I think today what we're going to learn a little bit about is some examples of how folks have worked together and align resources, initiatives, and efforts differently to be able to achieve greater impact and really work not just at the community level, but at the systems level. And so, Danya, I'm going to just give it back to you. Thank you for your leadership on this. SI Canada is always excited to be a partner and collaborator. We focus our days and nights and mornings thinking about how to achieve positive systems change and positive outcomes for using social innovation practices and approaches. I think this new emerging and role of the systems orchestrator is a key component that we're excited to learn more about.
Thanks, Andrea. I don't want to introduce Priya and Aruna and Purvi because I won't do it justice, but I do just want to say a word about what it's been like to work with them, because I think they model so well some of the temperaments and approaches and mindsets that they're trying to spread throughout the world. The co-design process that we've gone through to put together this conversation and the time that we've spent in generative conversation, learning about each other's points of view and experiences has just been amazing. And the way that all of you really center community and leaders in community in the frameworks that you're developing and the stories that you're offering has just been refreshing. And I've learned a ton from all of you together. So Priya, over to you for a more fulsome introduction. And thanks again for being here very late in your day.
Thank you, Danya. So quick introduction on me. I work with the Center of Exponential Change. I play 2 roles at the center. I tell all our stories of amazing entrepreneurs that we meet and we work with and we co-travel with. So I demystify what exponential change is. I turn theory into simpler concepts, and then I look around at stories around us throughout the world on what does exponential change look like, the why, how, what of exponential change. So today I'm going to try and do that a little bit. I'm going to share my screen for a quick introduction to the center. Let me see if you can see my screen. Just give me a thumbs up. And yeah, okay. I will take a quick 10-minute to introduce the center because we have a lot of exciting conversation after this with me and Danya talking about our own experience of meeting some very interesting organizations. And then we have a system orchestrators amongst us who's going to talk about what does it take to orchestrate a system. So quickly who we are a global network of support that rekindles the imaginations of system orchestrators so that they can catalyze positive exponential change. Lots of words. So I'm going to, in the next few minutes, I'm going to try and demystify some of these words for you. Why exponential change? What do we mean by it? Why is there a need to build a network? What kind of support is needed? And finally, who are these system orchestrators we are all doing this for? So I'm going to pick up a few words from this North Star that we have put together for us on who we are. Why global? Because this is a center co-founded by 6 different foundations from around the globe, from Brazil to US to India to South Africa, working with organizations around the globe, again, in various countries in Africa, Asia, Brazil, Latin America, US. And so it is truly global in the kind of enablers who have come together and the kind of system orchestrators that they are enabling. So why think exponential? And this is a reality that we are all seeing across many domains that we work in, whether it is climate or gender-based violence or income disparity. Some things are improving, but not at the pace we would all like them to be. The problems are complex, dynamic, they're mutating, and they're growing exponentially. But most responses are growing very linearly at the pace at which each organization can grow. So if we want to change, and if we want this change to happen at scale, with speed, in a way that change sustains, then we have to move beyond solving incrementally. We have to move beyond thinking 1 to 2 to 3 to think about how does 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 happen. And some of the stories that we will talk about today will tell you a little bit about how this is evolving in our network as we see it. But what is this exponential? So I would like to play a small video for you, which has given us a lot of inspiration to think about what does exponential look like.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino, which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes. And the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than a meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
So this is how we define exponential change. Change that leads to more and rapid positive changes. So two important words, more and rapid. And I will, in the next slide, I'll take you through what this looks like when one thing leads to another, sooner, faster, bigger. So this is an example from my country. I come from India. The last 2 decades of India have been this phenomenal journey of reimagination, bold actions, exponential impact. And it was unprecedented both in terms of its speed, because we achieved certain milestones that otherwise would have taken us many, many decades. And we did it at scale, ensuring that everyone is included. And when we're talking about India, everyone is a really, really large number. So for example, India went from one of the most unbanked country in the 90s to becoming one of the most banked in the world today. Something that would have taken, according to World Bank, would have taken India 47 years to happened in a mere 9 to 10 years. And that too for more than 1 billion people. And it started with building the first domino of Aadhaar, which is our identity layer in the country, which gave everyone in India a trusted way to prove that they are who they say they are, and do it digitally at a very low cost in a super fast way. This meant an amazing ease in opening bank accounts. For example, if I was a villager in a remote village, no one needs to come to my place to verify I am who I say I am. Neither do I need to go anywhere. I can put my biometrics, verify my identity, and in very short time, start a bank account. And that's just the beginning, because when I can prove who I am, I can avail a variety of services. I can avail a variety, I can choose from a variety of products, from government subsidies to loans to access to learning opportunities or even earning opportunities. And all this works not just for the top 1% or top 10%. It works for the entire country. This is scale. The next domino that was unlocked was this digital payment layer called UPI, or Unified Payment Interface, which is a low-cost payment system that made real-time transaction between two people or two entities very seamless, very secure, and at a very low cost. And in less than 6 years, India transformed from an offline, cash-heavy economy to a mainly digital economy. And these little QR codes of payment started appearing everywhere, from the roadside tea stalls to a high-end shop, from paying for transportation to getting extra love from gods. Everywhere the QR codes became ubiquitous. So much so that Indians today do more digital transactions than US, UK, Germany, France put together. This is speed. The next few dominoes, and unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of them, but the next few dominoes are leapfrogging India from an informal, low productivity economy to a formal, high productivity economy, where everyone can participate to their fullest potential, unlocking their agency. They can do so with dignity, because there is no need to stand in the line, for example, to receive your government subsidy. The government knows who you are, what you need at different points in time, and can offer that subsidy or that welfare directly into your bank account. And now we have a choice, freedom to select from many options. And frankly, there is no going backwards from here. This is change that's sustained. So inspired by this type of transformation in India, in 2017, we started asking, what would it take to think the same way about scale, about speed, about sustained change in education, in healthcare, in urban governance, and so on. So we started co-traveling with system orchestrators across the globe on big audacious quests to answer very similar nature. And these quests helped us develop a way to think, a way to reimagine, a way to design for exponential change. And we call this way of thinking societal thinking. And my colleague Hita can add some links there. This under societal thinking, we offer open knowledge. All our knowledge is produced under CC BY-SA, which means people are free to use, free to share, free to add to this knowledge. On reimagining knowledge around thinking about change at exponential space. But these journeys, so over time, we worked with about 500 such quests across 20 plus geographies under this work that we did with societal thinking. And our big learnings, that such audacious quests are possible. If we identify the 5mm domino and carefully plan for the next 1.5 times bigger domino and the next and the next. It's not that we're trying to throw this 5mm domino on the 29-inch domino, nothing will happen, but we are carefully planning for what is the 5mm, what is the 7.5mm, what is the 11.5mm, and so on. But as we co-traveled on some of these journeys, we realized that system orchestrators face many, many chasms when they start thinking about different ways of solving. With societal thinking, we try to bridge these chasms around knowledge, reimagination, design, action. But we realized that there are a lot of chasms that, for example, the chasm of working with diverse actors at scale. You need to work with governments, you need to work with market players, you need to work with different types of communities. You need to engage or catalyze a diversity of actors. Again, at scale, you need to mobilize a very diverse set of money. And this one big chasm that we came across, which was an internal chasm that leaders go through on self-efficacy. Can I really pull off something so audacious? And so we thought, how do we bridge these chasms for a large number of system orchestrators? We can't do it alone for sure. So how about we bring a network together that can work alongside these travelers and bridge their chasms as they appear? And this network offers a variety of things. It offers open experiential knowledge, ideas, experiences, method, practices that answer why, what, and how exponential change. Deep design and prototyping. These are people who bring in their open assets, their open knowledge, their connections, their networks to the system orchestrators to help them think about what are new prototypes I want to try. We offer paradigm grants of up to 500K USD, and these paradigm grants are a way to reimagine and prototype new approaches because, frankly, sometimes there is enough and more money to do more of the same. But the moment system orchestrators want to take a pause and try something new, there are very few risk capital available. We are also trying to build a funding network where, because we see this as not just a one-time prototype grant, but over time, as system orchestrators start building new ideas, new prototypes, how do they go to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage? And so how can we bring funding network of momentum partners who can keep the momentum growing? I talked about self-efficacy. So my colleagues who are on this call, Aruna, Hit, they work on what they call as the Leaders Lab, which amplifies leaders' self-efficacy. These are safe spaces for system orchestrators to nurture their self-efficacy. And lastly, this network offers a variety of global practitioners and experts who co-travel these journeys with system orchestrators as mentors, collaborators who can bring in their expertise, their ideas, their thought process to the process. Now, I have mentioned this word system orchestrators in every second sentence. So I'm sure you're wondering, who are these system orchestrators and what is so special about them? My colleagues here, they studied diverse leaders across the globe, and they saw a variety of things which put certain people apart from everybody else. And they started asking, what are these things which make you different? Because you are a person who's obsessed with solving the problem. You're a person obsessed with shifting the system. You are shaping the network, and you're doing so while remaining behind the scene. You are not the organization that is right up front. You're not growing your organization, or you're not doing things to grow your organization. You are doing this so that the problem gets solved. Who are you? And so when they started talking to a variety of people, they realized that there were 9 dimensions that they saw. And Hit, if you can share some reading material on these 9 dimensions, because unfortunately we don't have time today to go in depth on these dimensions. But the document that my colleague shared has what is the meaning of these 9 dimensions with examples of how people exhibit them. But for today's conversation, we thought we'll simplify a little bit, and we will pick 3 essential mindset shifts people go through as they move from this journey of being a social entrepreneur to a system orchestrator. And we thought today we will have conversation around what does good system orchestration require. And the 3 things that we would like to talk about today are that a good orchestration requires enabling ecosystem of diverse ecosystem of solutions. It requires letting go of custodianship, and it requires building shared narratives. So I would love to have a conversation now with Danya to see what does this mean in the work that you have done? What does this mean in the people that we have met? How do we think about this how do we bring in examples from our own experiences of who are these people, what do they do, what do they showcase? Danya, would love for you to pick one of these 3 and tell us if you have seen anybody in your experience who does these 3, and how does this whole idea of system orchestration align with some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, first off, I so appreciate this framework. You mentioned this idea of not going backwards when you showed that powerful video of the dominoes, and it really has me thinking about how we make change irreversible, especially in these moments right now where there are so many attempts to reverse change. So I think it's an exploration that I'd love to get into with you as we have this conversation. What are you learning about how to make these changes irreversible? I really appreciate the example too around the digital economic journey and the way that it shows how really, really local efforts and examples can really grow into something much, much bigger. And that it doesn't happen naturally. It has to happen when there's catalyzing factors in place, and appreciate so much you naming some of those. When I think about examples here of exponential change, I thought first, because you and I have been talking so much about work around poverty and work around income inequality and work around livelihoods in your context, and then in the Turtle Island context, I thought about the work around poverty reduction plans. 25 years ago, it was it was just an idea to have places that were bringing together all the assets in their communities, all the different actors in their communities around something as complex as poverty, around something as complex as prosperity for all. And what we have now, 25 years later, is every major city in Canada has a plan for poverty reduction. More than 200 communities around the country do. Nearly every province and territory has a plan, and we have a national plan. And the way that exponential change has happened both in the number, the spread, and then the depth, and at what we're starting to see around the alignment of these plans from hyperlocal up to national feels like an example of change here. And would love to hear from you. You've explained the frameworks, but what could you share about how these frameworks get applied in terms of some other examples of exponential change that you've seen?
Yeah, I saw these three ideas. I thought we could pick on maybe one of them and I'll talk about them, and would love to hear if you have a similar example from your experience. So I think I'll start with this let go of custodianship, because I think when I am talking to system orchestrators who we want to work with, people ask me, what are you looking for? And I said, the first thing I'm looking for is that you are at an inflection point where you've realized that my idea, my solution is not the only way to get to scale. Because at scale, diversity is the solution. It is not the problem. It is the only way to solve at scale, which means that me as a ideator, me as a social entrepreneur has to get out of this thought process of, I have this brilliant idea and it's going to change the world, because it doesn't. It doesn't work like this. I cannot possibly know all the contexts of all the people and all the geographies and all the problem statements and all the actors who are around me, even in a small country, let alone countries the size of Canada and India, even in a small country. And so this idea of letting go of custodianship is one of the biggest inflection points. And I'll talk about this example of this global organization called Project Echo. Project Echo works in the healthcare space. They work on how do you move medical knowledge faster between experts and frontline workers. Today, it takes about 15 years for cure of known diseases, known cure to reach the last mile, which means for 15 years at the last mile, people are dying of things that we know how to cure for. And so they said, how do we solve this? And they came up with what they call as an echo model, which is they bring in experts, they bring frontline health workers together over a video call, and they discuss cases. It's as simple as that. It's a very simple change. But what happens is that the experts learn about the diversity of cases they may come across, and the frontline health workers comes across this diversity of ideas and ways to solve the problems that they're seeing on the ground. And they call it all teach, all learn. It is not a discourse from one side to another. It is a place where everybody comes together and everybody learns. But when they first started, Project Echo said, it's a very simple idea. I will choose the experts, I will choose the frontline worker, and I will choose what the topic should be. And then we will get talking and magic will happen. Magic will happen. But as they started thinking about newer communities, newer geographies, they realized, I don't know what a healthcare worker in remote village of state of Bihar in India wants to learn about versus what a remote worker in Kigali in Rwanda wants to learn about. And who am I to decide what should they be learning? So how do I distribute this ability to solve to a larger variety of people who can decide? I will create the infrastructure where they can come. Somebody who understands the local context decides what is the topic, who's the expert, who's the frontline worker, and brings them together. So this whole idea of letting go of custodianship that I know best, it's so amazing to see how Project Echo was able to see this growth pathway that they had not thought of, because frankly, they themselves were limiting the growth that Project Echo could take. And the moment they got themselves out of the system started growing rapidly. And it was very interesting to see. I think it was very liberating for them as an organization as well, that I don't need to know every answer. When I start thinking about scale, I let go of custodianship and somebody says, do you have the answers? And the answer is, I don't know what works at scale, but together we know what works at scale. Would love to hear any reflections from you.
I heard about 10 years ago when I was still working in a local partnership in Utah, this idea. And I heard it again when I was in Portage La Prairie, which is an amazing community not too far from Winnipeg here in Manitoba in Canada. And both of these local leaders said a version of what you're saying. They said something that sounded like, try to go into conversations willing and excited even to leave them different than I came in. To me, there's a lot of synergy between this dimension that you mentioned around focusing on the problem rather than fix solutions, and being willing to let go of custodianship. I think the ability again to hold the possibility and be flexible about how we get there, and to hold the willingness to leave a conversation different than you came in, because the collective wisdom can be so much more powerful, and can be so reflective of experiences that maybe we haven't had, that have shaped our own mindsets and worldviews. That is something that I see in our work a lot as well. You make me think of work that the Hamilton poverty reduction table, which turns 20 years old this year, has done. Hamilton was one of the first communities that did work around living wage, around the idea that there is an amount of money that every job should offer in order to give people opportunity to subsist in our current economic system. Living wages are not enough to thrive and to build wealth over time, but they are sort of the base of what it takes to really subsist in our current economic system. And Hamilton came up with the framework for living wage, because they were part of a larger network of systems orchestrators thinking about how to take local examples, take the small dominoes and have them leverage into moving these giant dominoes. Hamilton brought these examples into community of practice of several communities that were thinking about income equality and economic transformation, and spread some of these practices. Those 6 communities then disseminated the learnings about how to build living wage communities across a much wider public, and then open sourced everything they did. They brought in researchers to validate some of the findings and to do documentation about what it takes to build these kinds of communities. That led to advocacy that was led by lived experience experts who had experience of not having living wages and then having them. That led to a way of certifying communities as living wage communities, which led to some national methodology around how to measure living wage, which has now come into a conversation around universal basic income and ensuring that everyone, regardless of whether they can work or not, has the amount of income needed to subsist in our current economic systems. I think that is a powerful example of focusing on the problem, letting go of custodianship, because it was really only that first move that was visible, and the decisions about what the next move would be were really based on a lot of agility and the ability to see that the next steps and the experiments that made sense to do would live in the collective wisdom, but not necessarily in the wisdom of any one person.
Amazing. I love this. One thing led to another story, because I love telling this story. It is so fun to say, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And I just love it. I think the second idea that we built, and there is a question also around this, is building shared narrative. And so I would love for you to start this conversation on what are ways that you have seen a network of ecosystem, different variety of actors come together around the shared narrative of we need to solve a problem, or this is the way we are going to solve it. How does that happen?
This is an area where I personally feel like I have a lot to learn. I think that there's very exciting conversations in Canada right now around how we build these compelling narratives. And I find that a big barrier to building compelling narratives is when we're trying to describe something that not everyone has experienced. And I think, particularly you and I talk a lot about poverty and income. For those of us who haven't experienced poverty directly, it's important to be able to paint the narrative and the feeling of what it is based on something that resonates with people's current experiences. Where I've seen it done particularly well is around the work that many local collaboratives do and these local collaboratives include systems orchestrators, around telling their story. Many of the communities that we work with have a practice of, on an annual basis, sharing the learnings and sharing the progress of these plans to solve complex issues that they're working toward. And there is so much sense making designed into the processes of putting together these reports, these narratives of why these problems persist, what the community is doing about it, how different people in the community can contribute, and to what end. I think that the process of going through a set of data, not just quantitative data, but the experiences of people, the stories that people tell, the observations of how things are progressing and where those chasms are coming up that you mentioned. I think that sense making I'm finding is a really important part of narrative building. And when the sense making is a collective process, people are coming to share meaning around the learnings and the progress and those chasms, that's a really powerful tool for building a shared and sticky narrative. How about for you? How do you respond to this question from Marwa?
Yeah, I think there are few parts of a shared narrative that I think if I break down building shared narrative, that the narrative has to be simple. It is a simple idea, and simple ideas go fast, they go far, they go wide. And so the first building block of the shared narrative to me is a simple idea. The second building block of this shared narrative is diversity that you can bring in. And when we say diversity, it is not just large number of civil society organizations. When we say diversity, we have to, of course, bring governments into the system, into the picture. We have to bring markets sometimes into the picture, because at scale, you need a diverse set of actors to stand behind the idea. And if you look at any social movements, they start with a small set of people, and then new people join in, and new people join in, and new people join in. And some of the older ones can move backwards, and then new people take the idea forward. For example, the UPI idea that I gave, the first, it was the government who came up with the first way of how can two people interact with each other at almost zero cost. And then markets got very excited, and they said, oh, can I build an app? And so today, Google Pay is one of the biggest users of UPI, this infrastructure that government has used. And a lot of these startups are now taking UPI to France, and so you can now use the UPI to pay ticket at Eiffel Tower. And so you need a diverse variety of actors to be there to take the idea forward. And I think the third one for me, component, is that when people take the idea forward, they take it forward in the way it makes sense to them, not in the way that makes sense to you. And so sometimes, and I'm going back to my letting go of custodianship, it is also letting go of, this is how you should talk. And so how do you build this agency, this dignity of everyone has a voice, everyone comes together, their idea may be slightly different, but they want to take it forward, and hence they are bringing in their ideas to the table. And so how do you bring those pieces? I would want to give an example of this organization in the US called Girl Trek, who I recently met. And I thought it is such a simple idea. So the simple idea is women should walk, and this is especially targeted at women from African Americans who traditionally have had to deal with obesity, lower lifespan, etc., and a variety of health conditions. And so they started with saying, walk every day, walk for 10 minutes. And it's a very simple idea. But what that walk for 10 minutes unlocked is that it became a habit. And the first domino of that was change in your health as a person. And as you started walking, you started meeting other women, and you started building a community. this community, and traditionally in the US, a lot of African American women are also a lot of them are single women, undereducated, underpaid, and living in conditions where they do not have a large community of their own who can come, enable, and support them. And so this simple idea of walk with other people started creating this community around them. So more and more women would start walking, more and more women would start connecting with each other, start building this community. And as you get into this habit of walking and meeting this community every day, you start talking about issues that are important to you or that you're facing. It could be around child support, it could be around education, it could be around livelihoods, it could be around mental health, it could be around your rights as a person, and how then over time this micro community starts coming around you, building your own self-efficacy as a person that I can do better. And this restores your agency, it brings you dignity, it enables many choices for you. To me, this shared narrative, and this narrative is now shared by many, many different types of organizations. Many people are arranging, many organizations are arranging, people getting together and saying, let's walk. It's a very simple idea. And you can walk in the ways you want. You can walk in orange clothes, you can walk in daytime, you can walk in morning, you can walk as whoever you are in whatever. And so love this idea of Girl Trek on simple idea, a shared narrative that everybody takes in the way that it works for them, but they're diverse actors who everyone has a space to add to the shared narrative.
I love this. Simple with diverse voices and available for people to make their own. You remind me that I think embedded in all of that is some really important work of self, and it's about all of us continuing to build our habit of listening well and listening for being for what's being said and not being said. You also remind me of the importance of making countless invitations for people to contribute the assets that they have that may not always be visible to us, but that I find always come through when there's really genuine invitations for different people to contribute to something, whether it's a narrative or something else. I know that we're going to hear from another one of the systems orchestrators in a moment, but Andre, who's one of our co-presenters on this webinar, is asking a question that I think is fantastic. So if you don't mind, Priya, I'll just ask you one more question before we transition to the next bit. I'll try to summarize a little bit here. Andre's pointing out that despite efforts in many frameworks, key issues like housing and reconciliation and economic mobility still remain very stuck. We're not making progress. In some cases, progress is moving in the wrong direction. So curious what distinguishes this approach and anything more you can say about how this approach drives really meaningful progress. And then I love this question, should Canada's approach be to draw lessons from India's experiences, from other global inspiration? But given what you know about this country right now, where should we be looking for inspiration and catalyzing?
I was having this conversation at this Whole World Forum with somebody that that the entrepreneurs in Global South have grown in a place of scarcity. Money is scarce, support is scarce, and the amount of work that needs to be done is really, really large. And so they have been very, very creative and innovative sometimes in the way they approach. For example, in India, we completely missed the landline. They were hardly any, the landline penetration was very low. But because of this, we jumped into the mobile penetration very, very quickly because we didn't have to kind of get out from one place to another. We just leapfrogged because we realized that that's the kind of infrastructure we cannot create. So similarly, I've seen a lot of variety of very innovative ideas I think one thing I would love to share about this network that we're building, this network of abundance, that everybody walks in with what do I have to offer and what can I learn from this network. And so all the system orchestrators that we work with believe in the idea of openness. So they create open knowledge, they create open tools, they create open assets, and they make it available freely to anybody who's in the network, outside the network, does not matter, but it is open knowledge. We're just starting to put together, how do you, if you want to learn more about exponential change, you want to learn about what assets are available, what is usable, how do you find it? And we're kind of building this AI layer in our own work, which parses through this knowledge of variety of people to say, you are a person trying to answer this question on what do I do in Canada? Can the AI layer throw you some interesting work that has been done in, let's say, Rwanda or in Kenya or in Indonesia or India, and what type of assets are available? Who are these people who are offering these knowledge assets that you can take and use them to build a better program, to build a better idea, to build a better network for yourself. So very early days, I don't have a very concrete examples of how we can learn from each other, but I'm really thankful for opportunities like what you have given to us, Danya, today, that places like these make discovery very easy. So today, we can learn from Andre can learn from some of the work that we're doing, but we are trying to figure out how do we make discovery of ideas easier and how do we connect with each other better. But would love to, if there are any specific questions, we are happy to have a separate conversation to see who are people who can be interesting for you to meet from our ecosystem, who can answer some of your questions around this.
You know, so many of your examples, including that one, point out that we don't know what's going to happen when we bring together people curious about why a problem exists and holding an attitude of abundance in terms of what we could bring to creating something different in the future. But it's the bringing together of people, as you pointed out, that is really the catalyst maybe for answering this question. Priya, thank you. Go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying that it's a very appropriate time to bring in this last bit that we wanted to talk about, which was enabling ecosystem of solutions. And for that, I would love to bring Purvi in for, she's a system orchestrator we've worked with for many, many years. And so she can actually bring in a great perspective on some of these in her own journey, but specifically on this idea of enabling a large ecosystem of innovators. How do you do that at scale? So welcome, Purvi.
Hi everyone. Hi Danya, hi Priya, hi everyone. Priya, do you want me to jump into the presentation really quick?
Yeah, why don't you just introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about Storyweaver, your own journey as an organization working as creating small change and then arriving at this place of what is my exponential, and then going through these 3 different phases of mindset shifts and coming up with what this wonderful idea of Storyweaver.
Sure. Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Purvi. I'm with Pratham Book Storyweaver. We're actually a 20-year-old organization. Storyweaver is about a decade old, so much before Center for Exponential Change came up with these really amazing frameworks. We try to do our own bit of exponential change in some way. And thank you, Priya, and the Center for Exponential Change team for inviting me here to share a little bit about my journey. I've been with the organization for about 19 years now. So, you know, it's been an amazing journey to see how you move from a solution mindset to a problem mindset. And some of the fantastic things that Priya and Danya sort of talked about, I'm going to sort of come in from my own lived experience over the last 18, 19 years with Pratham. So we have a short deck because we realize that you may not know enough about Pratham Books, about Story Weavers. I'm just going to quickly present and hopefully be able to keep time as well. All right, so today I want to share a story, not just of scaling access to books, but as system orchestrators, how shifting identities, letting go of control, and inviting ecosystems to dream and build together are some of the things I want to talk about. But I always like to start with some story. And today, this is the story and the moment that I've chosen to start my story with. This is the story of little Manisha receiving her very first book. Now, in much of the world, including India, it's it may not seem like an extraordinary moment, often a first encounter with imagination and possibility. But in the case of this girl, who was all of 15 years, this was the first time that she held a book in her mother tongue, Gondi. And we can only imagine how powerful it must have been for this little child to open a book, see her language, and see her identity. And this image has always grounded me personally in the work because it reminds me of who we are designing for. And as a system orchestrator, it's always been a provocation, right? How can we make this moment possible for every child? And that brings me to, Pratham Books, because we were really founded with this exact goal. How do you democratize access to children's books in mother tongue languages? So over the last 20 years, we've produced thousands and thousands of books in 32 languages. We've distributed about 50 million books. But even after doing so much work, we realized that this was just a drop in the ocean because India alone has 250 million children. And so, we began asking ourselves a systems question. How do you scale? How do you scale for a land that speaks 150 languages? And that's really the problem that we were trying to solve for, isn't it? So what we really did is we began to zoom out. We said that what if for a moment we stopped identifying ourselves solely as a publisher of books and started anchoring ourselves in the real problem, which is the lack of equitable access to storybooks. And this was a critical shift from being solution-focused to being problem-led. And, Priya talked a little bit about that earlier today. And then, so the fallout questions were really, how do we, instead of asking, how do we produce more books? How do we get more authors, more illustrators, more translators, which definitely we wanted to do. But how can we enable anyone, anywhere to create a story, a high quality story in their mother tongue, and then share it within their communities for children to get access? That's when we sort of decided to move from a publisher mindset to a platform mindset. And that gave birth to Story Weaver, which is our digital platform that was designed to unlock stories, through open access and community participation. But, it was not just about, building a platform. We really also had to let go. And again, we heard a little bit about that earlier today. For us as a publisher, what we had to let go really was the copyright that we had on our books, because our theory of change was that if we open license our content and if we put it up on this platform, we would have people come in and participate, the community come in and participate and take our mission forward. So letting go of custodianship, letting go of being, the only creator and curator or gatekeeper of content is really when the real orchestration can begin. So, it was not a very easy call, I remember, because this was way back in 2008. We launched Storyweaver in 2015, but we took this call way back in 2008. And I come from a branding and advertising industry. And I remember when internally we first talked about this concept, I was like, oh my God, we have to give up our copyrights, we have to give up our brand identity, we will allow anybody to come in and translate. What about the quality of the translations? These were all the questions that we had. But internally, we had to work through these questions. We had to work through this mindset of only we can create high quality storybooks and only we can create great storybooks to really come about and say that, how can we empower a whole community to join us in this mission as well. And of course, once we build the tools, we open licensed our books. We also took a step forward with the platform where we said, here are about 40,000-50,000 high quality illustrations. You can create your own storybook. You can translate your own storybook. We went a step further and we said you could also download this book. So if you didn't have internet, you could go and distribute these stories in a printed format in the communities that you worked with. Really, when we moved from building alone to being an enabler, we started inviting a whole ecosystem, right, to begin solving with us, whether they were educators, whether they were universities, whether they were linguists or governments, volunteers, everybody came on the platform to co-create and participate. And when you do that, something incredible happens, right? You really start seeing that domino move, the video that Priya showed us, right? So I've brought in a few examples on how we saw some of this shift happen within our communities. One in Uganda, we saw, we had these university students come in and translate on the platform in many languages. And within a short time, we had about 350 books come in. Then we had this one really sweet story from Mexico where they sent us this picture of a book in Spanish. And they said, before Storyweaver came, we used to take these printed books and translate in our language and put in strips. But now we can actually print in our own language without having to do this. And then, and closer in India, we had a partnership with one of the state governments who came in and translated 900 stories in just 45 days using mobile translate. But I think across these 2-3 examples, what happened is that the ecosystem also started making us of us. Like in the first example, when we were working with Uganda Christian University, they said that, we don't always have internet. Can you make available this entire platform for translation in offline mode? When we work with Chhattisgarh, with indigenous communities, they said that we don't even have laptops for translation. Can you make available a mobile tool for translation so that our communities can translate on mobile? And that's the beauty, is that when you start working with communities, when you hear from them, your role, instead of solving for just translation of stories, becomes how can you become an enabler to these communities so that, we can see impact happen at scale. And that's what happens, we really saw our impact grow exponentially when we took this approach as opposed to the problem-focused approach. This is one of our very first books on the platform, and just through co-creation, open content, and the platform, this one book has been translated in 155 languages of the world and has been read about 500,000 times. So this wasn't really just, us expanding. It really was the system expanding. And because we made space for others to step in, we could really grow exponentially as well. So what happens when we go from our mission to ecosystem thinking and a shared vision? I think that's really the third sort of principle that, Center for Exponential Change and the Leaders Lab talks about, and something that we've seen happen in our work as well. As we evolve, we saw this powerful shift happen that, we've seen again and again, where when you move to ecosystem thinking from a single organization's vision to a shared aspiration, we see so many different types of innovation happen on the ground. And this requires us sometimes to move slower, sometimes to listen more like we did with our communities in the previous slide, sometimes to also stop thinking of success alone as something that we've delivered, but also how do we spotlight a lot of the work that our communities have done so that it can inspire other communities, and together we have this shared vision of getting a book in every child's hand. And when you do that, a different kind of sort of energy enters the system, one that's rooted in trust, in co-ownership, and that's really when movements begin, isn't it? So here is this really sweet story of, we worked with public school teachers who created and translated, not created rather, who translated hundreds of storybooks in Urdu, which is one of the mainstream languages actually of India, but has very, very, very little children's literature in that language. So they came onto the platform and translated. And then the small group of teachers took it to many, many, many other teachers across the state. And what happened was nothing less of like real magic. They didn't wait for permission, for funding. They didn't wait for internet or computer. Sometimes they use their own mobiles, their own laptops brought into the school. But at the end, what they did is they got the children that they worked with in the communities, in the schools, on the platform to read stories in Urdu. And every child that finished, I think, 30 stories on the platform was given a printout, a certificate of appreciation to showcase the pride that this child had finished reading so many stories in her mother tongue or his mother tongue. This was really amazing. This is really a child taking ownership. This is from the same campaign where this child realized that a lot of her friends' parents were not able to navigate and create an account on Storyweaver. So she has literally created her own video of, you go here, then you click here, then you create an account, then you say this, and has empowered parents and aunties and uncles in the community to create their own accounts so that their children can have access to Urdu stories. And yeah, this is government. I think Priya talked about sometimes governments can also play a pivotal role. And this was really amazing where one state government in India came in and, printed, lakhs and lakhs of books at their own funding and distributed across 6.2 million children in the state. Something that, at this scale hadn't really happened until now with high quality children's literature and mother tongue languages. So this was truly, empowering as well on what can happen when you let go of control and custodianship. And this is again in Mexico, where we saw communities take ownership, and this is really a story that's very close to my heart because we really sort of worked with only a few people actually. One organization, few people, talk them through Storyweaver. This is what they can do, translate in their languages. And over years, we saw how this community grew, and this few people took it to a larger community across Mexico to create 2,000 stories on the platform in 26 languages, and really brought in 500 translators to take ownership of the languages that they were trying to bring on the platform and then take it to the children that they worked with. So this is really, amazing. And all of this has led, to this fantastic impact that we see where, when we launched just with 800 books in 24 languages, we now have 66,000 books in 378 languages of the world, all of which have come through community participation. So yeah, my last sort of thought, and this is really a personal sort of reflection of something that I've said, something rather that I felt, as we moved along the journey of Storyweaver. And for the first time that I've articulated like this, as I was working on this presentation, that, I really started seeing Storyweaver not as a platform with a fixed identity, but as an amoeba. So we really flowed into the shape that was needed at the time by the actor that we were working with or the network that we were working with, sometimes as a bridge for translators, sometimes as a canvas for communities. And when in doubt, we always went back to the mission and we stayed true to the mission. So that fluidity of structure, ownership, and purpose was really not a compromise when I reflect back on, as a system orchestrator, if I must say, but it was rather a strength that really led to this shared narrative, this impact, and this, purpose that we have and the mission that we were able to take forward. So yeah, I think what I would like to leave you all with is that, when you hold the center lightly, others can hold the edges boldly. And really in letting go is when we will come together.
Danya, over to you for the next section.
Your question, Purvi, at the end is so powerful. Thank you. And these images of dandelions and amoebas and other things in our living ecosystem that can inspire us to, as you said, leave the edges for many people to occupy. I really appreciate. I'm so happy now to invite Aruna into the conversation. Aruna, again, I'll ask you to introduce yourself, but I just want to share how amazing it's been to work with you and to observe in you how well you listen and how well you let go of control so that others can step in and help to shape something that is never clear at the start, but that emerges in a good way. So thank you for being here and thank you for showing up as you do.
Thank you so much, Danya. Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet everybody. Thank you so much, Priya, for doing this for us. That was just wonderful listening to you. And Purvi, always a pleasure. She's part of the cohort that we have at the Leaders Lab. So it's always wonderful to hear and listen to her stories, actually. So my name is Aruna Venkatachalam. I am part of Center for Exponential Change. And one of the primary work that I do here is to curate what we call as a Leaders Lab network. And I joined about 3.5 years and sort of like started this lab, and all the words that we had put together to sort of like name ourselves have been very deliberate, which is to say that this is for leaders. In our context, the leaders specifically refers to the systems orchestrators. So we call it a lab simply because we keep it very open to new ideas to come. And whatever the frameworks that we kind of come up with, mostly by witnessing the experiences and journeys of the other leaders, is something that we surface for everyone to sort of like learn from, from each other, from the peers, and also use it and then hold it very dynamically so that there is opportunity for all these ideas to be held very firmly, but a certain lightness so that new ideas can take its place and different ideas can kind of like coexist at the same time, because contextually these things can be very different actually. And network, because the whole idea is Leaders Lab Network is essentially a space which is being curated very with a lot of intentionality to invite systems orchestrators. And we believe that the knowledge is in the gathering actually, or knowledge is in the group of cohorts that we invite essentially. So we don't really offer much other than like a safe space. We offer experiences and we offer the community of peers so that they can co-travel in a trusted journey. So that's pretty much what we do at the Leaders Lab. We do a lot of, our work is a lot around the relational spaces and the importance of such relational spaces in the key mind shifts that the systems orchestrators go through. At the top, Priya talked about the 9 dimensions, which is a framework that we have sort of like curated, and it is not a theoretical framework, but something that we, like she said, having spoken to many of these leaders, many of the examples that Priya showed, and a lot more from across the globe, And it is essentially an sense making of what their life journey has been. So it is mostly to say that in the life of the systems orchestrator and the impact that they were able to create, we witness these kind of leadership dimensions is what it is all about actually. So that's pretty much what we do here, and my teammate Hita is also here, and thank you Hita for helping us put this together actually. So what maybe Danya, we could do is maybe take some questions, and I was wondering that like the key themes that sort of like that were surfaced today were around the why is a space like a Center for Exponential Change was even imagined essentially, right? Because to support the systems orchestrators who are in this job, and to invite multiple participants from across the globe, a very wide network to come together, so that in different contexts it can be sort of like it can be imagined. That's one of the themes that we talked about. And the other one was around what are the key attributes of being a systems orchestrator. We essentially, this was also in the journey of the systems orchestrators that we have witnessed very deeply. The three areas have been when Puri was speaking, I was really smiling because it's what she was talking to me is that it's a very principle-based approach, right? So basically she's saying we have certain core set of values, and that's the principle that I hold. But I really don't care who the actors are actually. I invite everyone. Governments can sometimes come, civil societies can come, teachers can come, individuals can come actually. So that idea, it's such a central idea to exponential change. So we talked about and to me, it was also both letting go of custodianship as well as saying that I'm going to be problem focused rather than solution focused, right? To say that the problem that I'm trying to solve is I want to put a book in every child in India, which is 50 million children, and the solution could be any. And the moment when the holding happens so lightly, and look at this young kid like teaching other people to sort of how to solve for this. And a lot of times I realize that we are old people. We don't know how to solve for this as quickly as some of these young people can actually. So if you can be problem focused, then what are the kind of solutions that it leads to? And I found the sharing that Priya did on shared narrative to be very, very useful, because how do you think about a shared narrative? I saw in question someone has said, how do you work with governments essentially, right? How do we make them invite them to your programs? So the governments everywhere are somewhat similar, I think, actually, right? But at the same time, they are also a very, very big part of the society that we live in, essentially. So the way that we approach is to sort of say that it's also not one lumpy entity, right? In governments, there are people who are extremely thirsty to make some of these changes, actually. So can we find them? Then can we share the narrative with them and then co-create, essentially, rather than saying, I have put something together, can you come and see this? What would it look like if we say that, hey, we share very similar cares and concerns, and if we come together and if we put something together, then what does that look like? Because then it's not something that you are inviting them to come for. It's theirs. It's a play that is co-created by them. And I'm not entirely aware of the specific context in which this question has been raised, but I'm talking about a mind shift where how can we think about it rather than saying, can I invite you to this? How does it look like when we say, if we share this narrative, then what does that look like essentially? And of course, then that process is very messy, very chaotic. And that is where the relational spaces that we curate become very important, because it offers them, the leaders, to sort of come and talk about, how do I ground myself? Do I have a community in which I can sort of I can be very honest there. I can be very candid and talk about some of the eye problems, some of the eye problems that I have. Do I have a space to talk about it essentially? And then also some of the other spaces that we create are these spaces, which is to say that I, as the leader, have a certain set of problems, but I, as a mission, also have certain challenges. I would like to talk about them, and do I have a safe space to talk about them? Right? So So most of the work that we do around in the Leaders Lab network is to support the systems orchestrator, is to understand that the knowledge is already there. Our job is to just hold the space and to facilitate for the knowledge to sort of like emerge, have the patience, have the courage to know that there is no one way for this to emerge, right? It will emerge, like we have had 2 cohorts so far. How it was in the first cohort and for how it has been in the second cohort is entirely different, essentially. But our biggest learning has been to say that how do we make things more optional? How do we make things more, design our offerings in such a way that people can sign in? How can we co-create with them rather than creating something for them, actually? And really provide. I know that we get a lot of resonance when we talk about the relational spaces, but still we feel that not enough, right? Like the idea of a community, idea of a peer community, and grounding yourself in the community can be very powerful while we try and answer many of these questions, and also learn from each other as to how does the mind shift happen, actually. What is your experience of that? Will be very different from an experience that someone else has, actually, because we all come from different places and we all have our own stories, our own life stories.
Aruna, thank you so much. There's a related question in the chat, and Priya and Purvi, I don't know if you might like to come back as well to consider this question, but here on Turtle Island, we have this concept of gatekeepers, people who may, for a variety of reasons, stand in the way or create barriers or augment those chasms you talked about, Priya, in the way of the kinds of exponential change that many of us might want. I'm really curious, as is the person who asked this question, about how you think about this idea. Is gatekeeping a thing, maybe? And then if so, how do you think about engaging when there are people making these chasms bigger or creating barriers or perceived barriers?
Purvi has met a lot of gatekeepers in her work. Purvi, you want to talk about that?
I think our own journey was also, like I shared, of that, right? Danya, can you repeat the latter part of your question once again? Sorry, I didn't make note of it.
I went on way too long, so I'll try to be more concise. When you do come across gatekeepers, can you say a bit more about what some of the strategies you've used with them have been?
I'll bring in again from the presentation, so it's more relatable without taking away much time, right? And sometimes it's intentional gatekeeping, sometimes it's just unintentional. Like for us, we didn't even think that not having a translation option on mobile could be gatekeeping. It was only when we worked with these hundreds of diverse indigenous communities that we were acknowledged of the problem that, oh my God, really the only device that they had was a mobile device. And so therefore, what can we do to unlock that and ungate that, or, open up that? So I think to me, that was really eye-opening, and that can only happen when you work deeply with communities, and communities trust you enough to open up and even share, right? That, hey, this is the problem. We don't have access to computer devices, but we are committed to the shared vision of getting a book in every child's hand, and we can do our part, but what can you do to help us? So to me, that was good. I think the other thing we definitely see is perhaps with say governments, right? When we work, and we've been often surprised to see how stakeholders within that system open up themselves and then open up the learnings that they have had and take it to a larger group, right? So we've seen, I think that being open and sharing have often been ways of really circumventing some of the gatekeeping. Wasn't
I think one
the
of the
printing press the biggest? Wasn't the printing press the biggest invention,
biggest,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. No, I think I've had this conversation with a variety of entrepreneurs that we work with. who work with governments, they work with markets, they work with in very difficult situations. And two things I think. One is their narrative is never about your idea is worse, my idea is better. I think their narrative is very forward moving or generative. And when I said, for example, this bit when I was talking to Girl Trek, and they said, see, the initial idea of saying uh, African American women have no access to a variety of things. We could have led with that, but we led with a, a very positive, a very generative messaging, which didn't put people on their guard. We didn't come across as I'm accusing you of something. Um, it came across as I'm trying to do something better for myself. Join in if you want to. And so I think this generative message sometimes makes it easier for people to join you because they're not saying, oh, you're blaming me for all the things that have happened. I think the second thing, especially when working with governments, is that you have to think about what is their narrative and how can your shared narrative add to their narrative. What is it that you can do for them? Because I think in a lot of our work, we start our questions with what can you do for me? And so how does your narrative add to their narrative could be another way to think about. Will that make your detractors your supporters? How do you bring them to your side of the table?
So one of the dimensions that we have is called like interconnect actively, essentially, which sort of like talks about this in the sense that rent-seeking behavior and gatekeepers are something, I mean, it's always going to exist in any system, right? We're not sort of like, but what interconnecting actively does is, to some extent, going back to what Priya said, which is, can you sense what is the current sort of like narrative that somebody else is holding, actually, right? Instead of thinking of like, hey, are they gatekeeping? Think of it, they have their own leverages and they have their own whatever set of things that they are supposed to do, actually, right? So if you can have a generative conversation around saying that, how does this strengthen what you want to do? It is a lot more like, for instance, in the case of UPI, when it first started, instead of saying, it's not like, it is really like a domino, right? Instead of saying, let's give everybody a digital, exchange that everybody can use, because it's a really big, massive idea, actually, right? But at that time, the government was very keen that we need to include more people into formal banking, actually, right? So to some extent, sort of like have this, see, most of the examples that we have given, most of the people that they've been doing it for 20 years. So this is not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. But to have like a larger idea of where am I going, actually, to what does my domino look like, at least in my mind, in the minds of my core team and people who are trying to design this with me. And at that time, lean into what like a really good systems orchestrator is able to interconnect, actively saying, where is government at this point of time? And government is everywhere, right? Or any other kind of a gatekeeper that we're talking about, whether you're working in education or climate or livelihood or anything, everyone has some set of agenda that they're trying to sort of like take forward, actually. How does what I want to do or my narrative fit into their narrative to find really a common ground, I guess, actually. We're not trying to make it look easy, but we are saying these are some of the things that could possibly help, because what else are we going to do?
There's an amazing systems orchestrator in Halifax who has been reminding us recently that in this collective work, there's a collective goal, but nested among that are individual goals and organizational goals and goals for different parts of the ecosystem. And I hear you all noting the importance of trying to understand and staying curious and honoring those goals, and that being a real unlock for people to bring their different assets into this work. I can't thank all of you enough, not just for being here today, but for what you are doing. Thank you, Aruna. Thank you, Purvi. Thank you, Priya. Thank you to everyone else at C4EC and in your network. Thank you as well to Tim Draymond and to my friends Rusha and Kushbu at Mantra for Change for bringing us into relationship. Thank you to PFC and to Andre and to Gwen and Andrea and all the folks at SI Canada for co-hosting and planning this event with us. And thanks to everyone who has joined in and who will listen to this as we move forward. The work you're doing is inspiring and informs so many of the frameworks that those of us trying to orchestrate systems aim to build with you. I've appreciated this overview of exponential change, the rationale behind the center, the real focus on values that you've brought in your description of those, your frameworks around the chasms, and then your examples of how you're collaborating with systems orchestrators and how the systems orchestrators are interacting with each other. I'm leaving with the important question around what is the catalytic change that we want to be making right now? It'll be different for each of us probably. And how do we make a description of the moment that will occur for everyone when that change occurs? How do we make that moment accessible to everyone? And then there's this question that you've brought up around the contributions that we can each make to catalytic change and the places where we can step back simultaneously and let go of custodianship so that others can step in with their assets. Thank you all so much. We will share the slides. We've got a bunch of upcoming webinars.
I don't need to cut you off, but I just want to give a shout out to Tim because he's the one who really got excited and then he kind of like introduced us to you. So thank you to him. I don't know if he's on the call today, but I'd really love to thank him.
He's here, and yes, thank you again, Tim, so much for that. Thank you, Aruna, for coming in with that. And I'll just say there's a lot of interest in getting your slides and materials, so we'll definitely share that. We will also write some of this up to make it some of the major ideas accessible to everyone. Jamie will drop in if she hasn't, as well as survey. We'd love to know what you thought of this and also the ideas that you're holding on what we might do next, what you'd like to see happen next. And with that, a minute over time. Have great days, everyone. Great evenings.